Canning supplies for water bath canning. My name is Marnie McCracken. I work as a farm production extension specialist for Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development out of the Paw, Manitoba. So I mentioned that we were going to talk about supplies for water bath canning. Well, in order to use a water bath canner, you need to be only canning high acid foods. And high acid foods are the only ones that can be prepared in a water bath canner. And those high acid foods are things like fruits, fruit juices, jams and jellies, and other fruit spreads, pickles, salsa, chutney, and tomatoes where there has been added acid. And are things like lemon juice or vinegar. Those are all high acid foods. So in some of the pictures there's some corn relish, some zucchini relish, some jam, some cranberry sauce, and also some peaches. So those are all high acid foods that can be canned in a water bath canner. So what are low acid foods? Low acid foods are foods that must be heat processed in a pressure canner to eliminate the risk of botulism. And these foods are things like vegetables, meat and game, poultry, seafood, soup, stews, tomato vegetable sauces, and tomato meat sauces. So these are things that you might be canning meat or fish or some leftover soups or stew or whatever, and storing those in jars and canning those. You must use a pressure canner. For today's video, we're going to be talking not about pressure canning, but about canning those previously mentioned high acid foods. So it can be very overwhelming to go into the store to get canning supplies. Here's a picture of a local store where I live, and there's just so much on the shelf, and it can be overwhelming and difficult to know what is it that I need, because there's just so much equipment and supplies that are there in the store. Knowing what is necessary to have and what is nice to have, but maybe not necessary, that can be helpful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are those canning supplies that you might need and that you might want to have to do some water bath food preservation. So what is actually needed when canning high acid foods in a water bath canner? The following there on the screen is a list of the supplies. The first 4 items are pretty well necessary that you must have, while the rest of the items are nice to have, but you do not absolutely have to have them and can usually find something that maybe you already have in your kitchen that will work instead. So the list includes food prepared using a tested recipe. A tested recipe is one from a reputable cookbook or cooking site. Adjustments to these recipes may change them so they are no longer a high acid food, and if those changes might in fact make them a low acid food, then you would need to pressure can them. So be aware, and please only use food that is from a tested recipe from a reputable website or reputable cookbook. Anything that deviates from that, you will want to use a pressure canner. You will need a water bath canner or a large pot with an inside rack. You will need canning jars with lids and rings, a jar lifter, and as I mentioned, those are the things that are necessary. Also, some things that are handy to have, a magnetic lid lifter and a small pot, a funnel, miscellaneous items like that you could find in your kitchen, like a large spoon or soup ladle, a clean cloth and kitchen towel, some vinegar, water, labels, or a marker and pen. And I'll go through each of these supplies in more detail in the next slides. So I mentioned a water bath canner with a lid and an inside rack. And this is what usually they will look like if you go into the store to purchase a water bath canner. There are these large kettles that have a rack inside them to lift the jars off of direct heat and a tight fitting lid. When you buy one of these pots like this in the store, as I mentioned, they often come with the lid and the rack, so you don't need to buy those separately. Any large pot, like a stock pot with a tight fitting lid, can be used as a water bath canner. So you don't have to have that canner that I showed in the previous slide. A large stock pot will work. You will need, though, that inside rack, and you can purchase one like is shown in the picture, or you can use something that you might have around the house, like A cake rack or other makeshift rack can also be used. The pot just needs to be deep enough to accommodate 1 to 2 inches of water over the top of the tallest jar without boiling over and out of the pot. So keep that in mind. The height of the pot is important. It needs to be higher, high enough to accommodate the tallest jar, plus 1 or 2 inches of water above that, and then room for the water to be boiling and not boiling out of the pot. Canning jars with lids and rings. There are various sizes and shapes of jars to pick from in the store, and when you buy new, they come with the lids and the rings included. And you can see that in the picture. There are stacks of jars there, and the lids and rings are already included with the jars, so you don't need to buy those separately. When canning, however, always use jars and lids designed for home canning. Do not reuse grocery store jars that once held spaghetti sauce, mayonnaise, or other foods. The glass is usually not as thick, which makes them more likely to shatter or explode when heated. As well, the lids cannot be reused, so ensuring a good seal is unlikely, leading to potential food spoilage. There are various size jars within 3 categories of top diameters of jars and lids. So you can see the top sizes of the jars in the picture on the left. They are the smallest around, and then in the middle they're a medium size, and on the right are large openings on the top of the jar. The regular or standard on the left is 70 millimeters, that diameter of that top. There's various sizes within that, but the tops are 70 millimeters. The gems are in the middle. Those are medium top openings, and those are 78 millimeters. And the wide mouth is 86 millimeter on the right. The jars you select may depend on what you are canning and the size of the jar that works for your family. Perhaps a smaller size jar for jam works well, and a larger jar for pickles because you like pickles and you eat more of them. That being said, if possible, try to use only one of the 3 categories of jars: regular, gem, or wide mouth. Then you only have to stock one size of lids. I will explain how the lids are sold in a bit, but let's cover the various jars and jar sizes first. Regular or standard. There are various size jars within this category. However, the diameter of the tops is all the same. You can see in the picture that there are very small jars. There's some round, some square, all the way up to a quart sealer. And in fact, there are sizes larger than this within this category of regular or standard. The lids, however, as you can see in the picture, are all the same, and they will come in a red box. So all of those lids are interchangeable. They're all the same size, tops on all of those jars. Gem jars. These are the oldest jars, and often somebody who's been canning for years and years and years, these are the ones that they will have and that they will have been using. These jars used to have the glass lids with the red rubber rings for sealing, and you can still buy the correct size lids for these jars and the rings and so on. They come in a yellow kind of orangish colored box, and you can see that although those jars are 3 different sizes, they are all the same diameter tops, and the tops are interchangeable. Wide mouth canning jars. These are just like it sounds. These are the ones with the widest tops, the biggest around on top, and although those 3 jars are different sizes, the tops and the lids are all the same size. Jar lids and rings. The snap lids, which are named for the sound they make when the seal sets, come in 2 pieces. There is a flat metal lid piece that is held in place by a metal screw band. The flat lid part has a self-sealing gasket. It's kind of a pinkish red color that forms an airtight seal and snaps closed as the jar cools. Lid should be discarded after each use and new lids used. Metal screw bands, however, those rings that I showed you, can be reused over and over unless they get rusty or are difficult to clean. The small boxes that are pictured, there's a small box on the left there, holds just the lids, while the larger boxes hold the lids as well as the rings, as you saw in the video. Stocking the same category of jars like regular gem or wide mouth means you only have to buy one size of lids. So as pictured, although there are three different sizes of jars there, they fit all the same lids. So you might want to, if you're canning, just buy that size so that you only have to buy that one size of lid. So here's a note about your jars and your rings and so on. Hang on to your jars. If you give some of your canning away to friends or family, ask for your jars back. This will save you from having to buy new jars every year. Store your jars all together in a location where you can find them. Some folks keep the boxes and store their canning and empty jars in the boxes. Hang on to your rings too. I've hung on to mine, and some of mine there are in a Ziploc bag. Then the next time you do canning, you can find them and reuse them. This way, the only item you need to buy for canning is the small metal lids. Everything else can be used for years and years. Canning tool sets. Canning tools are sold either individually or in sets as pictured on the screen. And these sets come with just about all the tools that you may need for canning. The price for the entire set can be comparable to buying just a couple of tools, so sometimes it can be less expensive in the long run to buy the entire set of tools that include a jar lifter, a lid lifter, a funnel, and so on, rather than buying these tools individually. A jar lifter. If you are going to buy one tool, the one that you really need to have is a jar lifter. This tool, as demonstrated, is for lifting hot jars out of that hot water bath by their necks. I have not found any other kitchen utensil that works as easily or as safely as this one. Magnetic lid lifter. This little tool is very handy to have and will come in that tool set that I mentioned earlier. If you decide you don't need it, a set of tongs can work as well. It has a little magnet on the end, and I think you saw that in the demonstration, and it will just grab those lids and lift them right out of that pot of warm water. A funnel. Trying to pour jam or other canning into the jars can be messy, and a wide mouth funnel is a big help when filling the jars. It fits inside the neck of the jar and helps to keep the jar rims clean. Some miscellaneous supplies that are handy to have and that you probably have around your kitchen include a large soup ladle or soup spoon, and you use that for filling the jars. A clean cloth and a clean kitchen towel. The clean lint-free cloth or paper towel is used to wipe and clean the jar rims before putting the lids on them. Vinegar is something that is very helpful to have as it prevents water stains and mineral buildup from hard water on the jars and in your canner. So add a couple of tablespoons or a couple of capfuls of just regular white vinegar to the water in the canner, and it keeps your jars from getting all cloudy from the hard water. Of course, you need some water for filling the canner, as I mentioned in previous slides, 1 to 2 inches above the top of the tallest jar. And for the warm water pot where you saw me lifting those lids out, you need some water for that as well. Labels and or a marker. This is to identify the contents of the jars and the date that it was prepared. New jar sets come with peel and stick labels. These labels should be stuck onto the metal lid on the top of the jar. I don't recommend sticking the labels onto the glass jars, because when you want to reuse your jar, you need to soak the label off first, which can be frustrating. Attaching it to the top metal lid is easy, as you discard the lid and use a new one anyway. If you don't have labels, just write right on the jar lid with a marker, right onto that metal lid, right on there with your marker, what's in the jar and the date that it was prepared. Supply storage. Often you only can once or twice a year, and your materials can wander away and be difficult to find. You can store your supplies right inside the canner or in a box or container where they can be easily located when you need them. Now that you've gotten your supplies lined up, whether it's seasonal fruit, jams, relishes, or other high acid foods, you can begin canning and preserving foods that'll last and be enjoyed for months. There are additional resources specific to Northern Manitoba and Northern Manitoba gardeners. They are found on the Manitoba government website on the Indigenous and Northern Relations webpage. So have a look there. They're under the Northern Healthy Foods Initiative. We also have a number of videos that can be found on Manitoba Agriculture's YouTube channel. We have a Northern Gardening playlist there, and we are adding to both the print resources and to the videos regularly, so check back often.